Part 1. Fan Theories. Hey, I know this is going to shock you, but Deltarune is a game that isn't complete. It's impossible to know when it might end, and even if it releases one chapter per year from now on, that means it will not be until 2028 when the story is finished. In 2028, we might not even have a country, okay? We might be... It's not good. When it comes to ongoing serialized media, one of the most exciting things is speculating where the story might go. Speculation and prediction is one of the primary functions of the human brain, after all. Just like we decide what kind of food we're going to have for dinner, we imagine the possibilities of where a story could go. Deltarune, being one of the most popular video games in recent years, makes a fertile bed for theory crafting and speculation. Of that speculation, no figure looms larger than W.D. Gaster, a character who has been theory crafted about since before Deltarune. Since the days of data mining Undertale for secrets. The conversation around Deltarune and Undertale is so Gaster dense that in spite of the fact that the player has a minuscule chance of seeing him in Undertale, everyone who engages with these games online knows who he is. The focus on W.D. Gaster prioritizes something that fans absolutely love, something open to speculation, something up for interpretation, a hidden nature of analyzing media. But there are two catches to this kind of theorizing. First, when the discussion is entirely focused on Gaster, the discussion eventually drifts away from other discussions, such as the themes and characters. Second, when discussion is monopolized, there tend to be a few theories that are prioritized or considered true when they are still mainly based on speculation. The second phenomena is known as fanon, a play on the words fan and canon. There are a lot of examples of fanon in media, including the Tentables from Homestuck. Don't Google that. The fact that Ness and Ninten are related, or that Gooey from Kirby is part of the antagonist Dark Matter. Fanon is a page category on TV tropes if you're curious about this, and there's also Ascended Fanon, where fan theories are later incorporated to canon material, like the exhaust port on the Death Star being an intentional... just watch Rogue One. What I find most interesting about this, as it pertains to Gaster, is the sheer chain of theorizing that is required for some theories that are essentially accepted as canon or expected to occur in Deltarune's later chapters. The Deltarune that exists in Gaster-based fan theories is a largely theoretical Deltarune, one that exists in the minds of its fans and has repeatedly been shown to be out of step with the Deltarune that Toby Fox is interested in creating. What needs to happen is a realignment, an acknowledgement that these are just fan theories, in order that we can have a better idea of what can be expected from Deltarune and what can be understood about it now. W.D. Gaster, as he exists in Undertale, is a solved matter, a textual, though obscure, event. There's less decoding required to understand Gaster than the sometimes hours-long theory videos would have you believe. The evidence that exists for his inclusion in Deltarune is convincing, but his existence has become a symbol for esotericism in these games, a hidden layer that just doesn't exist. It's a tied-up loose end that players are still obsessed with. A surface-level peek. Before we get into debunking and applying skepticism to Gaster's theories, we need to identify what Gaster theory is and how it is understood by most fans. This is pretty easy and will only take a couple minutes. Don't worry about it. What's difficult about this is that Gaster's evidence is kind of decentralized and spread around, and you kind of have to go spelunking on Tumblr and YouTube. The most basic form of the theory is as follows. W.D. Gaster in Undertale is the former royal scientist who created the core and mysteriously destroyed, is the same person as the narrator of Deltarune. This is due to the fact that his hidden dialogue from entry 17 in Undertale reflects dialogue in Deltarune, namely the phrase, very, very interesting, and a recurring phrase in Deltarune, darker yet darker. In the broad strokes, how plausible is this? Is Gaster the voice? Arbitrarily, I would give the likelihood, 80% that some version of Gaster is the voice. There are too many intentional similarities to ignore, but I don't think we can say for sure because there are some critical dissimilarities. First of all, the name Gaster, W.D. Gaster, Wingdings Gaster, that's what everyone thinks it is, He doesn't speak in wingdings in Deltarune. That's pretty significant. Entry number 17, which is attributed to Gaster, uses non-glowing wingdings and a specific speaking sound, which is not present in Deltarune at all. In Deltarune, every recurring character, such as Sans and Toriel, speaks precisely identically to their Undertale counterparts, from speak sounds to fonts. There would have to be some reason Gaster is no longer speaking in wingdings. There are a number of gameplay reasons for Gaster to be speaking in plain text instead of wingdings, such as the obvious fact that people can't read it, but it seems significant to point that out. This theory also fails to answer a critical question that often goes completely ignored, which is, what does this mean? What does this imply? As in, if Gaster is the voice, what does that mean for Deltarune? WD Gaster is a character for whom we know very little in a concrete sense. In Undertale, he is the vanished former royal scientist. And what could a character like that possibly have to do with the story and world of Undertale? We don't know anything about his wants, his goals, his friendships, or even his allegiance, because he's not a character for whom those things ever mattered before. In Undertale, he is a ghost haunting the narrative, not a character even in the proper sense. In other words, if we know nothing about Gaster, then why does it matter that he is the voice? The voice is an established character in Deltarune. We're just giving him another name for arbitrary reasons. However, Gaster theory isn't only a theory of broad strokes. Let's get into more detailed fan theories that connect Undertale and Deltarune that could imply something more significant. Gaster in Undertale. Okay, I'm going to ask what I think is a very fair question, which is this Gaster? Like, is this him? Like, yeah, we call this guy WD Gaster, but is that true? This a little Aoba-looking fella? Is he meant to be the former royal scientist? It's tempting to say yes, because when you image search Gaster, this is what comes up, and this is what people have accepted Gaster to be for the past fucking decade, but it's not as set in stone as you might think. In Undertale, there are very few actual references to WD Gaster, and many possible references to WD Gaster. I'm going to categorize them as such. Actual. Goners. The Goners, who randomly appear depending on Undertale's fun value and Hotland, all mention Gaster as the former royal scientist who was scattered across reality by falling into the core. Sound test Gaster's theme. A song called Gaster's Theme appears in the Snowden Fun Value Room. Entry 17. Entry 17 features a passage of Wingding's text. More on this soon. Possible. Fun value 66 guy. When your fun value is 66, there is a possibility you can encounter this sprite in a waterfall room. Boat person's man who speaks in hands. The boat person has a line. Beware the man who speaks in hands. This is implied to be WD Gaster due to the fact that Wingdings contain symbols based on hands. Smiling man. There's another fun value room where someone tells you someone is standing behind you and smiling. Mist man. There is a character in the True Lab who is only accessible when the room is foggy. This is thought to be WD Gaster. Let's go over all the actual references first, which establish WD Gaster as an existing textual character in Undertale's story. First are the Goners, or as they are known, Gaster followers. There are 3 of them, and each one has dialogue pertaining to WD Gaster, the former royal scientist. This is just a note. I'm not going to include the Goner kid who appears in Waterfall because he's more like general, and I don't think he has as much to do with WD Gaster. So I'm just mentioning that so no one fucking screams at me for not mentioning it. Follower number 1. He says, it makes sense why Asgore took so long to hire a new royal scientist. The old one, Dr. Gaster, what an act to follow. They say he created the core. However, his life was cut short. One day he fell into his creation and... ... Will Alphys end up the same way? Follower 2. Alphys might work faster, but the old royal scientist, Dr. W.D. Gaster, one day he vanished without a trace. They say he shattered across time and space. How can I say so without fear? I'm holding a piece of him right here. Follower 3. I understand why Asgore waited so long to hire a new royal scientist. The previous one, Dr. Gaster, his brilliance was irreplaceable. However, his life was cut short. One day his experiments went wrong and, well, I needn't gossip. After all, it's rude to talk about someone who's listening. This dialogue, even though it is very creepy, is actually incredibly straightforward when you take it together. A character named W.D. Gaster vanished and shattered across time and space. He used to be the royal scientist and created the core. This is about as open and shut as it gets, but it leaves some questions. Where is he now, and if he is listening, what does that imply? A lot of this stuff seems to be like creepypasta bait. I don't know what else to call it, but it's clear Toby Fox loves these kind of little secrets in video games because of the Yume Nikki inspiration, so make of that what you will. Next, let's look at Gaster's theme in the sound test room. This is also fairly straightforward, as it allows the player to hear Gaster's theme song that would have presumably accompanied the character into the game. The fun value needed to encounter this is 65. The file name for his music is referred to as muse_st_him. This information gives us a sense of a missing character, someone who is gone that no one remembers at all. There's a monstrously large video about Gaster's theme and its possible significance online by Andrew Cunningham. More on this later, but that's a good video. Next, entry number 17. Entry 17 is accessible via room 264, known internally as room_Gaster. This all but confirms the speaker's identity as W.D. Gaster. During the True Lab section of the Pacifist run, Alphys takes notes on her determination experiments, but entry 17 is missing. Using save manipulation, the player can access room 264, which plays a passage of text in uppercase wingdings. Translated, it reads, Entry number 17. Dark. Darker. Yet darker. The darkness keeps growing. The shadows cutting deeper. Photon readings negative. This next experiment seems very, very interesting. What do you two think? Entry 17 is the single time in the game that Gaster speaks, and what he says in the context of Undertale is essentially meaningless. The two open questions are what is his experiment and who are the you two he is referring to. People have speculated the two are Sans and Papyrus, as they are two characters with font-related names, but this is an inconclusive theory. There's more to it than that, but this is a video about Deltarune, not Undertale. Finally, let's discuss the possible Gaster references. I'll give each one a score for how likely I think it is that this reference is actually referring to Gaster. First, let's get this out of the way. Fun value 66 guy, or the sprite that everyone attributes to Gaster. I give this a score of 25%. When your fun value is 66, there's a chance you can encounter room 269, lol, while exploring Waterfall. This room is called room_Mystery Man, and it contains SPR_Mystery Man. When you interact with Mystery Man, he vanishes. The reason Mystery Man is assumed to be Gaster is because his appearance is interpreted to be a skeleton like Sans and Papyrus, and because this association means he could be a similar font-using skeleton. There are other tenuous connections that I've seen, such as the significance of the number 6, but the number 6 being a recurring motif for Gaster is largely based on confirmation bias and pareidolia. There's a fact that I've seen that Gaster has unused battle stats, which are all 6s, but I can't actually find any evidence to back this up anywhere. Gaster has no battle stats in Undertale, as far as I could find. On the Undertale wiki, his stats are listed, but there is no in-game reference to these stats anywhere. If anyone has more information on battle stats, please let me know, but this seems to be an urban legend. Mystery Man also shares an appearance with Aoba from the game Yume Nikki, which is a character who can only be encountered rarely and has a lot of urban legends surrounding them as well. What seems to be more likely than this sprite representing specifically WD Gaster is that Mystery Man is a reference to Aoba that was retroactively inferred to be WD Gaster, since no one knows who Mystery Man is. I'm not going to discount the notion that this could be WD Gaster in a moment of fanon creating canon, but as it stands, the connections between Gaster and Mystery Man are circumstantial. Second, Boat Person's Man Who Speaks in Hands. I give this a probability of 50%. When riding with the Boat Person, there is a random chance they will say, "Tra-la-la, beware the man who speaks in hands." This is thought to be referring to WD Gaster because Wingdings, the font, includes hand-shaped characters. I would say this is probably referring to Gaster, but there's no way of knowing since this reference it's literally one line of dialogue. Third and finally, there are the Smiling Man and the Mist Man. I give these a probability of about 10%. There's so little to these two references that it's hard to say either way. I guess that these are just generally creepy events with no other purpose than to unnerve the player. Okay, to summarize, let's go over everything at once. Gaster does exist and has various lines of dialogue that can be directly correlated to him. While he has very little to do with Undertale's actual story, he is a ghost who haunts the narrative, and the only characters who refer to him are mysterious and esoteric. We only possibly know their appearance. This information is the essential baseline for anything going forward, because in Deltarune, Gaster's name does not come up at all, and I do mean at all. The only event related to Gaster using the name Gaster is when the player attempts to use the name Gaster during character creation, which resets the game. This is a reference to the same phenomenon in Undertale, and given how many Undertale Easter eggs there are in Deltarune, it's impossible to assign any significance to this at all. For example, if the player plays Megalovania while completing Chapter 4's piano puzzle, Toby Fox rides in and stops you. This is of no significance, and is a reference to the prevalence of Megalovania in the Undertale fandom. If these types of fandom references exist later, why should we not assume the same for Gaster's name? In other words, it could mean anything, but it probably means nothing. Gaster in Deltarune. Before moving on, let's discuss the idea of typing quirks and language. There are a number of words and expressions that theorists give special attention when it refers to WD Gaster. The first phrase is very, very interesting, which is used in entry 17 and is usually repeated in all caps with line breaks after the varies. The second phrase is just the word him, which is a tag used in the game's files, such as Gaster's theme being referred to as muse_st_him, as well as the music playing in Deltarune's introduction being referred to as another hymn in all caps. Hymn also carries the leitmotif from Gaster's theme, which recurs in another hymn. In other words, there are certain phrases that can be assumed to be representative of WD Gaster, but there's an unspoken question at play here. Why would Toby Fox blur the lines like this? Why not call Gaster Gaster? After all, the name Gaster is used explicitly in Gaster's theme. Is this a wink and a nod to fan theorists, or does this indicate there is more at play? The pronoun him and his also sometimes represents another character, one who could be important in Deltarune, Asriel. What's the deal with that? To be fair, that is a stretch, since him in another hymn has the same motif as Gaster and not Asriel. All I mean is that these vague pronoun games are present in other characters too, which further obfuscates everything. What I am saying is that these motifs and phrases link Gaster to Deltarune, but that ignores the fact that Gaster's name is not explicitly anywhere in the game itself. Furthermore, Toby Fox's use of leitmotif doesn't always necessarily represent a singular character. In fact, most motifs Toby uses are present over a number of connected characters. For example, the Justice theme is shared between Undyne and Undertale, and Gerson and Deltarune. We shouldn't assume Gerson is Undyne, that would be absurd. The Ghost theme is used in Napstablook, Dummy, and Mad Mew Mew's tracks, which hint at connections between them. but the similarities are somewhat vague. In 2018, in the lead-up to Deltarune's eventual release, the Undertale Twitter page was taken over by a black profile picture and tweeted several cryptic things. It's clear readers were meant to assume that the speaker was W.D. Gaster. This assumption was fueled by the strange line breaks that harkened back to Entry 17 and some recurring phrases like, very, very interesting. In these tweets, Gaster greets the player, saying he is looking forward to something known as the Deltarune. In 2021, before Chapter 2 released, the official Undertale Twitter page was taken over again. This is not significant because there was no new information, except that Chapter 2 was now playable, and then there was a similar but more brief takeover in June of this year. The way the theory connects Gaster in Undertale to Deltarune goes like this. 1. Entry 17 is attributed to Gaster, when translated includes the tag phrase, very, very interesting. 2. The Undertale Twitter is taken over by someone who uses the very, very interesting tag. 3. Deltarune, when it was called the Survey Program, opened to a survey for vessel creation using a character with the same typing style as the Twitter takeover. There's no reason to assume that this was not a publicity gimmick that had the approval of Toby Fox. I couldn't find out who runs the @Undertale account on Twitter, but it's likely to assume it's run by Toby himself or Fangamer on his behalf, both of whom would be posting on Toby's behalf. Even so, Twitter posts ought to be considered extra-textual. While there's no reason to doubt them, their significance is overstated in theory crafting, and because they exist in the chain of logic between Undertale and Deltarune, we shouldn't take for granted that the assumption that this is a Gaster is an assumption. It's a very solid assumption, don't get me wrong, but there remain some open questions. Taken on the whole so far, the impression that I want to give you is that the character W.D. Gaster is probably in Deltarune. I've given you a skeptical account of the pro-Gaster evidence, not to debunk the idea of the voice in Deltarune being Gaster, but because it's important to remember that this is still a theory. The simple fact of the matter is that the name Gaster has never been explicitly stated in any Deltarune material, even the previously discussed tweets, and that leaves a massive swinging door wide open into God knows what. What I want you to understand is that any theory that centers W.D. Gaster is based upon speculation, and no matter how solid these theories are, speculation is just speculation. Part 2. The Gaster Problem. Here's a question I want you to think about. When discussing W.D. Gaster in Undertale and Deltarune, what have I not discussed? What parts of Deltarune and Undertale have gone completely missing in this essay so far? I haven't mentioned the name Frisk, Susie, Chris, or even the fact that Deltarune is a video game. I haven't discussed the characters in the story. I haven't discussed even other theories like the identity of the Roaring Knight, Chris's true personality, or what might happen in Chapter 5. The only thing I've discussed in this entire essay so far is one singular, esoteric character within Undertale. The broader question that I want to return to is a question that has nothing to do with the specific evidence of Gaster's inclusion in Deltarune, which is, put simply, so what? Gaster is the voice, so what? Gaster knew about the Dark Worlds in Undertale, so what? What could all of that possibly have to do with Deltarune? And the fact of the matter is, we don't know. We don't have any idea in the foggiest sense. What all Gaster theories have completely failed utterly to establish is a purpose or point to the central mystery. It's as impactful as the age-old Sans' Nest theory. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but so what? We just don't know. And this is what I want to emphasize, is that when it comes to theory crafting about Deltarune, the fans are kind of bad at it. Gaster is a mysterious character whose goals are not known. He talked to the player and offered to create a vessel for them. The theory crafting in Deltarune it's fine, but when it comes to the actual theories, there are occasionally some absolute fucking crackpot ones that sometimes completely undermine the entire point of the game and the themes and entirely ignore the main characters. Most fan theories are, critically, also just wrong. I'm reminded of a popular fan theory in Chapter 1, which implied Ralsei would be the game's secret final antagonist, or the Papyrus is the Roaring Knight. With these theories, while they're funny, they are unserious in that they completely ignore existing stories in the games that you can play right now. The more outlandish the theory, the more clicks it seems to farm. So the question I want to ask, and that no one is really asking, is who the fuck is this guy? I'm not talking about WD Gaster. I'm talking about the voice, the real and present character in Deltarune, who seems to know a lot about the things that are central to the plot, in spite of the fact that we don't know anything about them explicitly. Is the voice Gaster? I don't care. I don't know. I want to know what his deal is, because I don't trust him. I don't trust him. Get him away from me. Get him away from those kids. The voice facts. Before we get into the weeds here, let's go over everything the voice says in the game of Deltarune, because it isn't much. I'm going to call these canon voice lines, and I'll also include the non-textual but still probably canon Twitter takeovers as semi-canon lines. On the Deltarune text dump website, we can see that there are a few objects that the voice is attached to, including device contact, device choice, etc. Most objects in Deltarune have a name with the nomenclature obj_name, but the device items are not connected in that way. Are you there? Are we connected? Excellent. Truly excellent. Now, we may begin. When Deltarune, previously called Survey Program, is started, the voice speaks to the player directly. It is essentially a conversation between the player and the voice, where the player creates a character, reminiscent of other character creator screens, particularly the Mother series, where you also select things like favorite foods. First, you must create a vessel. Select the head that you prefer. Select the torso that you prefer. First, it asks if it and you, the player, are connected, mirroring the way that it speaks on the Undertale Twitter page. Then it asks you to create a vessel, in other words, something for you to inhabit. The clear implication is that the vessel is meant to be the player's in-game avatar, and all of the choices in some way reflect how that avatar looks in the game. It also looks a lot like Chris when you actually start the game. How do you feel about your creation? It will not hear. Love? Hope? Disgust? Fear? Have you answered honestly? You acknowledge the possibility of pain and seizure. After a number of choices about the vessel are made, the voice says you will soon meet someone very, very wonderful. You are about to meet someone very, very wonderful. Of course, of course. Of course they are the same. Name. Thank you for your time. Your answers. Your wonderful creation will now be discarded. Oddly though, the syntax changed during the last few lines before Chris wakes up and the player takes control of them. This is an interesting moment. It seems that the player and the voice become somehow disconnected. If we assume that the voice is the voice based on their syntax, then the changing syntax means the speaker of the final lines might be someone else. This seems to be the case since the voice says you are going to meet your vessel, but you don't. You meet Chris. There are two options here. The voice is playing a prank on you, or the voice is being interrupted somehow. Attached to device failure, which plays when you run out of HP, the following dialogue from the voice plays. It appears you have reached an end. Will you try again? Will you persist? Then the future is in your hands. Then the world was covered in darkness. The dialogue seems to indicate that the voice wants you, the player, to persist, and if you choose not to, the voice says the world was covered in darkness, which clearly refers to the apocalypse Ralsei describes in Chapter 2. The fact that this is past tense is interesting. More on this later. In Chapter 3, during the fight with the Roaring Knight, device failure has some alternate text. Incredible. I felt it there, shining. Your power a little further. This occurs in the fight when you have the option to continue the story by losing or winning. From these dialogues, we can assume several things about the voice and what it wants. Firstly, it wants you to continue trying to win the game, otherwise it would not appear in the game over screens. Second, it believes the future is in your hands, which is an essential theme of Chapter 4. Thirdly, it seems to be in favor of defeating the Roaring Knight instead of failing against it, saying a little further as encouragement. At the end of Chapter 4 in obj_credits_Chapter 4, the voice appears and congratulates the player. Well done. The halfway mark has been attained, but it is still waiting. How much longer now, my Deltarune? From this we can assume that the voice desires something known as the Deltarune for itself. What that is, it's impossible to know now. So to summarize, the voice began speaking to the public on Twitter and drew people into the survey program, where it helped players create a vessel before either being interrupted or changing its mind. Either way, the original vessel was discarded. Instead, we play as Chris, who resembles the vessel from the creation screen but clearly isn't. Then, during the Deltarune game, the voice provides encouragement to the player directly. The voice speculation. From this, we can get an idea of the voice as omnipresent and in some way outside of the narrative, with several questions about them. Question 1. What do they want? The voice appears to support the player, specifically the player, not the characters in the game. When the voice speaks, they give the player choices. These are not like the dialogue choices throughout the game when the player speaks as Chris. There are a few options to what the voice does depending on their scant interactions. When the player dies, the voice offers us to continue, but if we decide not to, it tells us the world was shrouded in darkness. It's unclear how the voice feels about this, but it's very clear that by the nature of giving us an option at all, we are meant to assume the voice does not want the world to fall into darkness. In that way, their goals are aligned with the player, Chris, and the broader world at large. However, I don't think that necessarily means they're benevolent. It's likely that they're benevolent, but that all depends on one thing. The voice is also aligned with the prophecy, which is in Chapter 4 shown to be something that's not really good. Susie sees something horrible transpiring in the prophecy, and if the voice desires that to happen, then its goals are malevolent. I don't believe the voice is in favor of the prophecy necessarily. In Chapter 3, during the fight with the Roaring Knight, the voice encourages the player to persevere against the knight. I would say right now, the arbitrary percentage is that the voice has like a 60% chance to be at least trying to be benevolent to the player and a 40% chance to be actively working against them. Question 2. Who are they? Next, a question that has gone totally under-discussed in the discussion surrounding Gaster as the voice. Is the voice the angel? Throughout the game, there are many references to Angel's Heaven, which is something that is unexplained and mysterious, and centers a mysterious figure known as the Angel. It's unclear if the voice is the angel, but it's not impossible. If the voice is the angel, the chance that they are benevolent goes down significantly. In Undertale, the Deltarune was related to a prophecy about the underground, an angel who could either be saving the underground or killing everyone inside, this ambiguity captured in the phrase, "empty the underground." In Deltarune, this same symbol returns, but since there is no underground to escape, the symbol's meaning is completely mysterious. Critically, this meaning is up to the player and their choices. More on this soon. Let me read Ralsei's prophecy. For millennia, light and dark have lived in balance, bringing peace to the world. But if this harmony were to shatter, a terrible calamity would occur. The sky will run black with terror, and the land will crack with fear. Then, her heart pounding, the earth will draw her final breath. Only then, shining with hope, 3 heroes appear at world's edge. A human, a monster, and a prince from the dark. Only they can seal the fountains and banish the angel's heaven. Only then will balance be restored, and the world saved from destruction. If Ralsei's prophecy is to be trusted, then the angel's heaven refers to the state of being that results from the world being destroyed, the earth drawing her final breath. The voice never says explicitly that they are seeking angel's heaven, which we will assume is a bad outcome, but the voice does say it is looking for the Deltarune, calling it my Deltarune. Does this my possessive language indicate that this is something that rightfully belongs to the voice? If so, it's likely that the voice is the angel. Or does the possessive language indicate that this is something the voice wants? If so, this is unlikely that the voice is the angel. There is a reason that I don't think the voice is the angel, however. More on this later. Question 3. Who or what is the presence at the end of character creation? For what reason does the voice seemingly discard the vessel? It's impossible to know why with this limited information we have, but there is something I think we can assume about what happens in this introduction. We, the player, create a vessel. The vessel is meant to be you, the specific player. However, something happens and the vessel is unable to be used or discarded. The why is unclear, but there is something that is clear: what happened instead. Through the game, we play as Chris, a human who bears a resemblance to the vessel in many ways, from obscured eyes to the style of clothing. There is a lot of speculation that you could insert here, like Chris being a vessel of himself, Chris being a failed vessel, or Chris being someone else's vessel. Whatever the case, Chris is established as being a separate being from the player at various critical points, such as Noel's house in Chapter 4. For some unknown reason, the vessel's place was taken by Chris. This act seems to reverberate through the rest of the game, and sometimes we as players seem to be working against Chris entirely. In Chapter 2, Spamton realizes that his new Spamton Neo body isn't enough to, in his words, get to heaven, so he attacks Chris outright. Why? Is he attacking Chris or attacking us? From Ralsei in Chapter 1's battle tutorial.
See that heart, Chris? That's your soul, the culmination of your being. Within it holds your will, your compassion, and the fate of the world. If it gets hit, you and your friends will lose HP. If everyone's HP reaches 0, we'll lose the battle. So please take care to avoid the enemy's attack.
The soul in Undertale was understood to be something the player controls and is attached to the character Frisk. But in Deltarune, this difference is far more pronounced. Frisk as the vessel was always very in step with the soul, but Chris acts independently of the soul very often. Why am I discussing this as it pertains to the voice? Because it seems in some way the voice isn't getting what it wants or needs, and Chris is the character that is in the way of that. We were meant to create a vessel and act as it, but the vessel that we really occupy has its own body and character outside the player. Telephones and screens. Let's discuss Jevil and Spamton. Both characters are similar in that they seem to have been driven mad somehow, their behavior changing rapidly, even in a basic sense, going mad. Jevil goes mad, calling the battle between himself and the player a game, which is true from our perspective. He is then said by Sham to have gone mad after speaking to someone. Spamton too goes mad after speaking on the phone to someone, but whenever the other Spam characters or Tenna talks about who Spamton was speaking to on the phone, they describe garbage noise. Garbage noise also occurs on the phone when you try to use it in a dark world, the same garbage noise that occurs in Undertale's entry number 17. All this is to say that someone is making these characters go fucking nuts. In Jevil's case, seeing the world as a game, and in Spamton's case, desiring to reach heaven. Somehow both characters understand that they are in a game and want to escape. The idea of reaching a higher level or connecting is recurring in these mad characters, the idea of Angel's heaven. I teased the idea that the voice is the angel before, but I don't think that's accurate. Let's assume for the moment the voice is Gaster, and Gaster is the one talking to Spamton and Jevil. What does that imply? If Gaster is causing madness in others by communing with them, what would the purpose be? My interpretation that Gaster, the voice, whatever you want to call him, is the one trying to get into Angel's Heaven. And Angel's Heaven is our world itself. Jevil and Spamton realize their worlds are transient and non-existent. The Dark Worlds are worlds within worlds, and they're trying to make their way free into ours. And so, if our world, the world outside the game, is heaven, then who lives there? The angel. You. Me. Part 3. Angel's Heaven. The voice is the culmination of all the failed attempts to access Angel's Heaven. Whoever it is capable of connecting with us via the survey program started it all. The reason they're trying to connect is unclear, and it's also unclear what it means in the relation to the prophecy and the remainder of the game. But I believe the ultimate purpose of Deltarune is an attempt to sever the connection between heaven where we live and the world of the game. And that connection was originally opened by whoever the voice is. The remainder of this video will be entirely speculative, whereas up until this point I've tried to establish only in-game materials. I think the voice isn't W.D. Gaster, as in the former royal scientist in Undertale. I believe that W.D. Gaster remains scattered throughout Undertale's reality, but I believe the voice is a new character, possibly a version of W.D. Gaster, maybe someone new. The specific identity doesn't really matter. Whoever it is, they are trying to climb into our reality, an errand that we know is impossible. The membrane between our reality and fiction is one way. Characters can't emerge from books or movies, and while we can't enter their reality either, in video games we can interact in certain ways with them. The idea of the voice climbing into our reality is impossible, but connecting to us from a video game isn't. The interpretation I have for the game involves the specific phrase, "banish Angel's Heaven." If we are angels and we live in heaven, then banishing us means cutting us off from the world of the game. This is thematically in line with Tony's previous work, Undertale, where Flowey begs you not to reset the game after the pacifist ending. There's a semi-antagonistic relationship between a player and the game they're playing. Undertale and Deltarune both underline the sometimes upsetting control a player has over a game world. We aren't just in charge of our vessel, but of the entire world itself and its fate. In any RPG, we are put in the place of a legendary hero. The world revolves around that character, and by extension, we the players. This ultimate power would be crushing and horrible for the denizens of these worlds. In Deltarune, the church is devoted to the angel, it's devoted to us. When characters talk about the angel watching over us, they're talking about the player. We are, in a literal way, watching over the town as we walk through it as Chris. We look down into it, and our power, the light of the soul, is what is able to defeat titans and banish fountains. We have ultimate control over their lives, and on some level, they know it. This is reflected even lower, too, because then Chris and Susie, the Lighteners, control the Dark Worlds, which can't cross over into our worlds, and it just gets more and more crazy. The way that the voice factors into this is very simple. They are the one who opened the world of Deltarune up to us, and they hope to use that power for some purpose, their Deltarune. I see two options for what is going on here. The benevolent option is that the voice opened the connection to us to prevent the world from being taken over by darkness, to stop the calamity and the apocalypse from befalling the world of Deltarune. This action might have been ill-advised, as evidenced by how the voice sometimes seems creepy, but the voice desires the same things as the player and Chris does. It's possible that the voice wants to see the prophecy completed to enact whatever bad future Susie saw in the glass in Chapter 4. It's possible that the voice believes fulfilling the prophecy, for better and worse, is the only way to save the world. The evidence for this is how the voice helps the player even during difficult fights, like Chapter 3's secret boss. The voice also helps the player when they fail on game over screens. Malevolent option. It's possible the voice opened connection to the player to cause the world to be overtaken by darkness, to enact the calamity and the apocalypse. I don't see this as likely because the voice is actively working against the knight, who is the most active person when it comes to destroying the world through titans, and Chris, when not occupied by the soul, seems to be working with the knight. However, it's possible that Chris and the knight's intentions are somehow misunderstood. In other words, is it really true that titans are here to end the world? Is the prophecy true or a tactic to trick the characters and the player into thinking the knight is evil? There's no concrete proof of this, after all. If the knight and Chris are working together for the benefit of the world, then the voice would be actively working against them somehow, against the player. I don't see this option as very likely because there is no concrete reason to assume the Titans are anything but a destructive force. There's so little known about the Knight and their goals that it's completely unclear. However, I do find it odd that the Knight was willing to summon a Titan in the church so readily, when they seemed to have further goals in the mix. In other words, why did the Knight choose to create a Titan in the Sanctuary Dark World? If the Titan is a harbinger of the end of the world, and the Knight can make one so easily, why would the Knight bother kidnapping Undyne? Why would the Knight do anything? What's the point to it? Whatever the case, there is something deeply wrong with the prophecy as Ralsei knows it. Unanswered questions. What frustrates me the most in Deltarune fan theories is the fact that so few of them acknowledge limitations in knowledge. So many theories are essentially created for the sake of clickbait, trying to construct a hypothetical future of Deltarune, as if the games are already completed somehow and the answers just need to be decoded to discover the full story. This might not be a big deal to you. After all, it's fun to guess what comes next in a serialized work like Deltarune, but at the same time, there's something destructive about this. When Deltarune Chapters 3 and 4 came out in June, there were a wave of fans who were actively frustrated with the fact that their fan theories didn't pan out, or that significance was afforded to things that weren't significant. In the run-up to Chapter 3, there was a picture of a chair posted as part of the Spamton sweepstakes. So much significance was given to this chair that it boggles the mind. People were making theories that the blanket was symbolic of a shadow mantle, or the shadow cast by the chair was a new darkener, when in reality the chair was just an asset being revealed that was going to be used in a speech by Ralsei in Chapter 3 about how dark worlds work. I talked earlier about why Gaster theories are frustrating, because they take attention away from what is actually established and puts the emphasis on side content and extraneous details. There's so many characters in Deltarune, and to be fair, people do discuss them, but so much more time and effort is given to theory crafting and secret finding than the content that is staring us right in the face that has as much, if not more, depth. For instance, who's Susie? Who are her parents? Who's the real Chris? What is Ralsei? Even though these are the main characters of the game, we know nothing about them, and yet people seem to have time for is W.D. Gaster and some fucking chairs. In short, we need more character analysis, more thematic analysis, and less Easter egg hunting. Because I'll be blunt, Easter egg hunting is easy. It's cheap. Anyone who's ever clicked around a wiki knows that. What isn't easy, and what is more rewarding, is character analysis, thematic analysis, and trying to discover what it all means. Alright, that's another video for you from Funk McLovin. I'm really glad people accepted my last video, the Homestuck Deltarune video. If you're interested in more stuff, I have a Patreon page where I post previews. Right now I'm doing a Patreon Q&A for July. If you have a question for me, go to my Patreon and ask me a question. Right now, I opened the questions up to anyone who subscribes, even if you don't want to give me any money. And just check out the Patreon. There's some cool stuff on there. The Patreon question of this week is from Nanamon. Do you have any favorite audio dramas? Any obscure ones you'd recommend? When I think of audio drama, the first two things I think of are Welcome to Night Vale and Alice Isn't Dead. Alice Isn't Dead is pretty good. It kind of petered out, and I'm not as interested in it. A lot of people know the Magnus Archives. That's pretty good. Something similar to an audio drama would be like on Audible, you can go there and like a lot of audiobooks are really well made. There's an audio drama version of Good Omens, which is worth a read. It's different than the TV show. There's a lot of good audiobooks out there. One that I really liked was, it's in the Vampire the Masquerade lore. It's called Walk With Us, I think. And it's like an anthology about 3 vampire stories, which is really good. The last one is my favorite. This woman tries to like make a a human farm for, that kind of thing. Oh, there's also an audio drama version of the Star Wars movies, and those are free on YouTube, and they're really good. They have Mark Hamill in them, and they have a couple alternate voice actors for like Obi-Wan Kenobi. They're just really good. Anyway, if you want to ask me a question, check out my Patreon, patreon.com/funkmclovin. And thank you for listening. Oh, God.